Nathan Westwood's heart stopped the moment he saw his son standing. For 4 years, doctors told him it was impossible. James and Lucas, his twin boys born with a condition that trapped them in their own bodies, would never walk, never talk, never reach for him the way other children reached for their fathers. But there they were, standing with support, their small legs shaking with effort. Lucas was making sounds, real sounds, not the random noises Nathan had learned to ignore. James's hand stretched toward a woman in a waitress uniform, his eyes locked on her face with an awareness 17 specialists swore would never exist. The woman was Sophie Chin, his regular server from the Riverside Bistro, the one he'd banned from his table 3 weeks ago for interfering. She was conducting therapy, professional, precise movements that shouldn't come from someone who poured his coffee. What Nathan didn't know, Sophie was risking prison with every second she spent with his sons. What he didn't know yet, the doctor who told him his boys were hopeless was the same man who destroyed Sophie's career for exposing his lies. In 72 hours, everything would come out in court. But first, someone had to break. Would you risk losing everything to save 2 children the world gave up on? Drop your answer below and hit subscribe. Because what happens next ends in a courtroom revelation that exposes who really decides which children deserve hope. Make sure you're subscribed, or you'll miss the moment these twins say their first word, and who they say it to. 3 weeks earlier, Sophie Chen's alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., dragging her from a dream where she still wore scrubs instead of a stained apron. She silenced it before the second beep, a habit born from 3 years of trying to disappear. Her studio apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood was small enough that she could touch opposite walls if she stretched. Rent, $1,100 a month. Money in her bank account, $284.73. Days until eviction if she didn't pay. 6. The eviction notice sat on her kitchen counter next to a box of generic cereal. She'd read it so many times she had it memorized. Final notice. No exceptions. No extensions. Sophie touched the silver bracelet on her left wrist, the only jewelry she ever wore. It was delicate, with a small engraved charm that read Emma. Her fingers traced the name the way they did every morning, a ritual of remembrance for the child she couldn't save nearly 4 years ago. The child who died while Sophie fought accusations that weren't true. The child whose parents gave her this bracelet before they left Seattle, too broken to stay in the city where their daughter's treatable condition became a death sentence because politics mattered more than medicine. She didn't let herself think about it. Thinking led to feeling, and feeling led to the kind of crying that made her eyes puffy for her shift. The shower ran cold because hot water cost extra. She dressed in her uniform, black pants worn thin at the knees, white button-down shirt she'd bleached and ironed last night, sensible black shoes with insoles she'd replaced twice. The fabric smelled like the industrial detergent from the laundromat 3 blocks away. By 6:15 a.m., she was walking down Pike Street toward the Riverside Bistro. Seattle in October meant autumn chill that bit through her thin jacket. The smell of Pike Place coffee roasting carried on the wind, and the sound of Elliott-based seagulls screaming their morning complaints. The city was waking up around her. Tech workers in expensive athleisure heading to early yoga classes, homeless men and women still sleeping in doorways, delivery trucks rumbling over cobblestone streets. She knew this walk by heart. 43 minutes if she hurried, 52 if she didn't. The Riverside Bistro sat in Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. It catered to Seattle's elite, venture capitalists, tech CEOs, old money families who'd owned the city since before Microsoft existed. Sophie had worked there for 18 months, invisible in the way service workers become invisible to people who have money. "You're late," Derek, the floor manager, said when she pushed through the kitchen doors at 7:02 a.m. She wasn't. Her shift started at 7 a.m. 2 minutes wasn't late. Won't happen again, she said anyway, because arguing with Derek meant losing shifts, and losing shifts meant missing rent. The morning rush started at 7:30 a.m. Sophie worked the main dining room. 12 tables, capacity for 52 people. She was good at her job in ways that surprised other servers. She memorized orders without writing them down. 23 orders that morning. Exact specifications, dietary restrictions, complicated modifications that customers demanded with the casual entitlement of people who'd never been told no. Table 6 wanted egg whites scrambled soft, no oil, with spinach on the side, but not touching the eggs. Table 9 needed almond milk steamed to exactly 140 degrees for a cappuccino. Table 12 required gluten-free bread toasted dark with butter on the side, not melted. Sophie remembered every detail, delivered every order perfectly, smiled when spoken to, disappeared when not needed. But Derek was watching her. He pulled her aside during the 10 a.m. lull, his voice low and warning. "Stop staring at customers," he said, "especially Mr. Westwood's table. You make them uncomfortable. You're done here. Understand?" She understood. She nodded. She went back to work. What Derek didn't see, the way Sophie's hands moved when she was stressed. Small gestures, unconscious movements that looked like nervous fidgeting, but were actually modified sign language from her therapy days. Thumb and index finger together. The sign for help. Palm facing out, finger spread. Stop. Hand over heart. Care. Her body remembered what she was, even when she pretended to be something else. That afternoon, she took her lunch break in the alley behind the restaurant. She ate the peanut butter sandwich she'd packed from home and tried not to think about 3 years ago. About Dr. Richard Holloway standing in front of the medical board, his voice steady and convincing, accusing her of malpractice that cost a child's life. About her license being suspended while they investigated. About 4-year-old Emma Chen's condition worsening during those 6 months. Her treatment delayed. Her parents' desperate calls that Sophie couldn't legally answer. About the funeral she attended alone because by then everyone believed she was responsible. She was cleared eventually. The evidence proved Holloway had prescribed the wrong medication, not her. But clearing her name didn't bring Emma back, and it didn't restore her career. Holloway had too many connections, too much institutional power. The Whisper Network made sure no hospital would hire her. Her license technically existed, but using it meant opening herself up to scrutiny she couldn't survive again. So she poured coffee and memorized orders and pretended she'd never been anything else. Nathan Westwood entered the Riverside Bistro at exactly 12:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, the way he did every Tuesday and Thursday for the past month. The entire restaurant shifted when he walked in. Servers straightened, voices lowered. Derek appeared from the back office, his customer service smile stretched tight across his face. Even the kitchen staff glanced through the window to see him. The billionaire who tipped 30% and owned half the tech startups in Seattle. Nathan moved through the space like someone accustomed to deference. Expensive Tom Ford charcoal suit tailored precisely to his frame. Salt and pepper hair styled with product that cost more than Sophie's weekly grocery budget. A Patek Philippe watch caught the light from the windows. He was 41 but looked younger, the way rich men do when they have personal trainers and dermatologists and stress that money can solve. Except the stress he carried couldn't be bought away. Behind him, his assistant Claire pushed a double adaptive wheelchair. In it sat 2 identical 4-year-old boys, James and Lucas Westwood. They wore matching navy blue sweaters and small adaptive headphones. Their bodies were positioned carefully with support padding. Heads held upright by specialized cushions. Their eyes stared forward with the unfocused gaze Sophie had seen too many times in her previous life. The look of children trapped inside neurological systems that weren't connecting properly. A private nurse followed, carrying a medical bag and wearing scrubs that marked her as permanently on duty. Derek led them to the corner table. Nathan's table, always reserved, always ready. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries cut white lines across gray water. The best view in the restaurant. The best table. The best service. Nathan settled into his chair while Claire positioned the twins' wheelchair beside him. The nurse hovered nearby, checking monitors that tracked the boys' vital signs. "The usual, Mr. Westwood?" Derek asked, though everyone knew the answer. "The Chateau Margaux," Nathan said, not looking at the wine list. $800 a bottle. He ordered it the way other people ordered water. Sophie watched from across the dining room, pretending to refill water glasses at table 4. She'd seen Nathan and his sons 3 times now. Each time, she noticed what others didn't. The way James's eyes tracked the reflection of light on glasses when the sun hit them just right. The way Lucas's left index finger twitched slightly when the restaurant's background music shifted to piano. Small movements that most people dismissed as random neurological noise. But Sophie knew better. She'd spent 7 years learning to read those exact signs. Nathan leaned toward his sons, his voice soft enough that Sophie couldn't hear the words from where she stood. He wiped Lucas's mouth gently with a napkin, his touch tender despite the boy's lack of response. He tried to make eye contact with James, positioning his face in the child's line of sight. "Daddy's here," he whispered, and Sophie's chest tightened at the heartbreak in those 2 words. The boys didn't react, didn't turn their heads, didn't change expression. But Sophie saw James's pupils shift slightly, saw Lucas's breathing pattern change. Micro-responses that meant something if you knew what to look for. "You see them too, don't you?" Sophie startled, nearly dropping her water pitcher. Martha Williams sat at table 5, her elderly face creased with knowing. She was regular, came in every Tuesday for the past decade, always ordered the same grilled salmon, always tipped exactly 20%, always watched everything with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "I don't know what you mean," Sophie said quietly. "Yes, you do." Martha's voice was gentle. "You see those boys differently than everyone else in this room. You're not looking at them with pity. You're looking at them like a doctor looks at a patient." Sophie's pulse jumped. "I'm not a doctor. I'm a waitress." Martha took a sip of her tea. "If you say so. But I've been watching you watch them. And I've been watching them respond to you, even from across the room. Whatever you were before you started pouring coffee, you're still that person. You just don't wear the uniform anymore." Sophie said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. Across the restaurant, Nathan Westwood sat with his unreachable sons, surrounded by wealth that couldn't fix the only thing that mattered. He'd built a billion-dollar cloud computing empire from nothing, consulted 17 different specialists across 3 countries, spent $4.2 million on experimental treatments that promised hope and delivered nothing. His smile, when it appeared for Claire's benefit, never reached his storm-gray eyes. Sophie turned away, back to work, back to invisibility, but her hands moved unconsciously, thumb and index finger together, then apart, the sign for help. It happened during Nathan's 3rd visit that month. Sophie was clearing table 7 when she heard Lucas make a sound, not a cry, not quite a vocalization, but something that pulled her attention like a hook. She glanced toward the corner table. The little boy's hand was moving, reaching toward a water glass that had caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. The movement was uncoordinated but intentional, a motor planning attempt that most people wouldn't recognize as meaningful. Sophie's feet moved before her brain caught up. She crossed the dining room, water pitcher still in hand, directly toward the Westwood table. Nathan was on his phone, his back to the twins. Claire was in the restroom. The nurse was outside taking a call. For 30 seconds, the boys were unattended. Sophie crouched to their eye level, making herself small and non-threatening. She repositioned the water glass within Lucas's reach, not handing it to him, but giving him the chance to complete the movement he'd started. "That's it," she whispered. "You can do it." Lucas's eyes shifted, focused, locked onto hers with an awareness that sent electricity through her entire body. Real eye contact, sustained, purposeful, the first step to everything. "What are you doing?" Nathan's voice was ice. Sophie looked up to find him standing over her, his phone forgotten on the table, his expression caught between confusion and anger. Sophie stood slowly, professionally. "I'm sorry, Mr. Westwood. I was just... They can't understand you." His voice cut through her explanation. "Save your pity for someone who needs it. My sons don't need a waitress hovering over them." The words hit like a slap. Not because they were cruel, Sophie had heard worse, but because they were wrong in a way that cost these children everything. 3 voices screamed in her head simultaneously. Survival instinct. Walk away. Keep your job. Keep your rent. Keep your head down. Professional knowledge. That eye contact was deliberate. These children are responsive. Someone needs to tell him. Moral obligation. Emma died because you stayed silent. You stayed silent because powerful men told you to. Are you going to let it happen again? Sophie made a choice. She crouched back down to the twins' level, deliberately, in full view of their father. She made a specific gesture with her right hand, index and middle finger extended, touching her temple, then moving outward. It was a modified sign from pediatric therapy, a visual cue designed to encourage visual tracking in children with processing delays. Lucas's eyes followed her hand, tracked the movement from start to finish. His head turned slightly, barely a centimeter, but it turned. James made a sound, not random, responsive. "What did you just do?" Nathan demanded, but his voice had changed. The anger was still there, but something else crept in underneath it, something that looked like hope and sounded like fear. Sophie stood, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "He's tracking movement, Mr. Westwood. Both of them are. That's not nothing. They don't track movement. Every specialist has tested them. They don't respond to visual stimuli." Then the specialists weren't looking closely enough. Nathan's face flushed. "You're a waitress. You don't know what you're talking about. You're giving false hope based on random chance and desperation." "Hope isn't something you give," Sophie said quietly. "It's something you recognize when it's already there. Your sons are there, Mr. Westwood, right in front of you. You just have to see them." She walked away before he could respond, before her voice could shake, before anyone could see her hands trembling. Behind her, the restaurant had gone quiet. Martha smiled knowingly into her tea. Other diners whispered to each other, phones probably already recording what came next. Derek stood by the kitchen door, his face red with fury, his hand already gesturing for Sophie to follow him. But Sophie didn't look back. She only heard Nathan's voice, sharp with confusion. "Lucas? Lucas, can you?" And then silence. The kind of silence that meant someone was seeing something they'd been told was impossible. Nathan stared at his son. Lucas was still looking toward the spot where Sophie had stood, his eyes focused and tracking, searching for the woman who'd spoken to him like he was a person instead of a tragedy. Derek grabbed Sophie's arm the moment she entered the kitchen. "My office." Now, the kitchen staff went silent, everyone suddenly fascinated with their prep work. Sophie followed Derek through the narrow hallway to his cramped office that smelled like old coffee and bleach. He didn't sit. Neither did she. "Mr. Westwood's table is off limits," Derek said, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "You don't approach it. You don't serve it. You don't look at it. Do you understand me?" "I understand. One more incident. One more time you make a VIP uncomfortable. And you're done here. Not suspended. Done. I'll make sure every restaurant in Seattle knows why." The threat was clear. The service industry ran on reputation. One bad reference from a respected floor manager meant unemployment that could last months. Sophie nodded, said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. She finished her shift in silence, avoiding the corner table where Nathan still sat, his phone untouched, his eyes fixed on his son's with an expression she couldn't read from across the room. That night, alone in her apartment with the eviction notice still on her counter, Sophie did something she'd promised herself she wouldn't do. She researched Nathan Westwood, billionaire, tech CEO, founded Cloud Access Solutions at 28. Net worth, $3.7 billion. Widower. His wife died in childbirth, delivering the twins. Estranged from his only sibling, Rebecca Westwood, who died 2 years ago. Sophie clicked on Rebecca's obituary. Special needs advocate. Disability rights activist. Worked with families navigating pediatric neurological conditions. Her quoted words in an interview 3 years before her death. My brother believes money solves everything. He'll learn differently when it matters most. Sophie's chest tightened. Rebecca had known, had warned him, had died before she could make him listen. She closed her laptop and pulled out something she hadn't touched in 18 months. A hidden folder tucked behind her closet, filled with her old therapy protocols. Specific techniques for nonverbal communication disorders. Evidence-based interventions for sensory processing delays. Step-by-step procedures for building neural pathways in children the medical system had declared unreachable. Sophie made a decision. Next time Nathan came in, she would observe but not interfere. She would keep her job, pay her rent, stay invisible. But even as she promised herself that safety, her hands traced the protocols in the folder. Her professional mind already designing a treatment plan for 2 boys she had no right to help. Emma's bracelet caught the lamplight. The engraved name, a reminder of the cost of staying silent. Over the next 2 weeks, Nathan Westwood became a predictable fixture at the Riverside Bistro every Tuesday and Thursday at exactly 12:30 p.m. Sophie kept her distance, following Derek's orders. She worked other sections, served other tables, stayed invisible in the way waitresses learned to disappear. But she couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop cataloging every clinical detail her trained eye caught from across the dining room. James's left hand showed increased mobility on Tuesdays. Lucas turned his head 2 degrees more toward sound sources on Thursdays. Both boys demonstrated micro-expressions when their father spoke, subtle facial muscle movements that indicated processing and comprehension, even without verbal response. Signs of neuroplasticity potential that 17 specialists had somehow missed. Sophie memorized every observation, writing nothing down, but storing everything in the clinical filing system her brain had never stopped using. Visual tracking improvements, intentional versus reflexive movements, response latency patterns, all the data points that should have been in their medical charts, but clearly weren't. On the 3rd Thursday, a man accompanied Nathan to lunch. Not Claire, the assistant, or the nurse. Someone different. Dr. Alan Pierce. Sophie recognized him from her online research. Nathan's business partner and college roommate. Co-founder of Cloud Access Solutions. He wore expensive casual clothes and the easy confidence of someone born wealthy. But his eyes were kind when they landed on the twins. Genuinely kind, not performative. Sophie was refilling water at table 8 when she overheard their conversation. You're obsessing, Dr. Pierce said quietly, cutting into a steak. That waitress said one thing, and you've been spiraling for 2 weeks. She saw something the specialist didn't. Nathan's voice was tight. Or she's a con artist who read desperation on my face and decided to exploit it. Nathan, brother. Pierce leaned forward. I know you don't trust easily. Not after what happened with the Stanford researcher who faked those trial results. But your grief over Rebecca is making you see threats everywhere. Rebecca, Nathan's sister, the special needs advocate who'd warned him about medical arrogance. Rebecca knew better than anyone how many frauds exist in this field, Nathan said. People who prey on desperate parents with miracle cures that cost everything and deliver nothing. That waitress didn't ask you for money. She didn't offer to cure them. She just said they're more responsive than you think. Maybe she's right. And maybe she's dangerous. Sophie moved away before they noticed her hovering. Her pulse hammered in her throat. Nathan thought she was a con artist, thought she was exploiting his grief. The irony burned. She'd lost everything trying to help children, and now helping children made her look like a predator. She cleared tables mechanically, her mind spinning. Pierce had mentioned specialists, consultations. Sophie needed to know which doctors Nathan had seen, what tests they'd run, what diagnoses they'd given. On her break, Sophie did something reckless. She approached Nathan's table while Pierce was in the restroom. "Mr. Westwood, I'm sorry to interrupt. You're not supposed to be serving this section." His voice was ice. "I'm not serving. I'm asking." She kept her voice low, professional. "The specialists you consulted for your sons, did any of them run a comprehensive Bailey Scales assessment or test for sensory processing disorder rather than just neurological damage?" Nathan stared at her. "Why would you possibly know what those tests are?" "Because Sophie caught herself. Couldn't say it. Couldn't expose herself. "Because I've researched pediatric conditions. And if your sons were misdiagnosed, those are the gaps I'd look for." "Misdiagnosed?" Nathan's laugh was bitter. "I paid the best neurologists in the country. Dr. Holloway from Stanford consulted on their case personally. You think you know better than him?" Sophie's world stopped. "Dr. Richard Holloway?" "Yes. He flew to Seattle 9 months ago, reviewed all their records, observed them personally. He confirmed what everyone else said: permanent neurological impairment, non-progressive, untreatable." Nathan's voice broke slightly on the last word. "So unless you have credentials I don't know about, stop giving me hope that doesn't exist." Sophie's hand moved unconsciously to her silver bracelet. Emma's name pressed against her wrist like an accusation. Holloway, the man who destroyed her career, the man who'd rather declare children hopeless than admit his own diagnostic failures. He'd evaluated James and Lucas. Of course he had. Of course he'd declared them untreatable, because treating them would require admitting he'd missed what Sophie could see from 30 feet away. "I'm sorry," Sophie whispered, but she wasn't apologizing for interrupting. She was apologizing to 2 4-year-old boys whose only crime was being evaluated by a doctor who valued his reputation more than their futures. She walked away before Nathan could respond, before her anger showed, before she said something that couldn't be unsaid. Derek caught her arm in the hallway. "I saw you at his table. You're done after this shift." Sophie nodded. She'd expected it. But for the first time in 3 years, she didn't care about losing a job. Some things mattered more than rent. Nathan Westwood ran background checks the way other people Googled names, thoroughly, expensively, and with resources most civilians didn't have access to. Sophie Chen, age 32. Current employment, the Riverside Bistro. Previous employment, nothing. No tax records before 3 years ago. No social media presence. No professional licenses. No educational records in any database his investigator could find. She'd appeared in Seattle 3 years ago like a ghost materializing from nothing. Red flag didn't begin to cover it. People didn't just appear. Everyone left digital footprints, transcripts, addresses, credit history, something. Sophie Chen's past had been either meticulously erased or never existed in the first place. "What do you think it means?" Nathan asked Alan Pierce during their Thursday lunch, keeping his voice low enough that the twins' nurse wouldn't hear. Pierce cut his steak precisely, the way he did everything. "It means she's either in witness protection, running from something, or hiding something. None of which makes me trust her around your kids." She knew medical terminology, specific tests. She looked at them the way doctors look at patients, not the way waitresses look at customers. So she Googled some terms. Nathan, listen to yourself. Everyone claims they can help. Everyone sees what you want them to see because you're desperate and wealthy. The perfect combination for scammers. They take your money and deliver nothing. You know this. You've lived this for 4 years. Nathan did know. He'd paid for 18 different treatment protocols. Stem cell therapy in Germany. Experimental drug trials. Cranial electrotherapy. Hyperbaric oxygen chambers. Specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Stanford. Each one confident. Each one professional. Each one ultimately useless. For $0.2 million spent. No improvement. No progress. No hope. And then a waitress crouched down, made a hand gesture. And his son made eye contact for the first time in months. Nathan pulled out his wallet, fingers finding the photograph tucked behind his credit cards. Rebecca, his sister, smiling in front of the disability rights nonprofit she'd founded. The last picture he had of her before the stroke took her too fast to say goodbye properly. Her last words to him haunted his memory. Money doesn't cure everything, Nathan. Sometimes you need to listen to people who actually care, not people who care about your money. She'd been talking about the boy's doctors, warning him about his arrogance, about his assumption that expensive meant effective. He dismissed her the way he dismissed anyone who questioned his methods. 3 weeks later, she was gone. I noticed something, Pierce said carefully, watching Nathan's face. The boys are different on restaurant days. More alert. James made that sound last week. Not a word, but vocalization. And Lucas has been tracking movement more. I'm not imagining it, and neither are you. Nathan had noticed, had tried not to notice, because noticing meant confronting the impossible cognitive dissonance that a waitress might see something 17 specialists had missed. Coincidence, Nathan said. Developmental changes happen randomly in neurologically impaired children. It doesn't mean anything. But James had made that sound while watching Sophie work across the dining room. And Lucas's eyes followed her specifically, not other movement, not other servers. Her. Nathan's mind said impossible. His training said trust credentialed experts, not intuitive strangers. His wealth said the most expensive opinion must be the most accurate. But his heart, the part of him that was a father before he was a billionaire, said his sons were reaching for someone who saw them as human beings instead of medical cases. Run a deeper background check, Nathan told his investigator that afternoon. I want to know everything. Who she was before Seattle, why she disappeared, what she's hiding. Everything. If Sophie Chun had secrets, he'd find them. If she was a fraud, he'd expose her. If she was dangerous, he'd protect his sons. And if she was right, if the specialists were wrong and she could actually help. Then Nathan needed to know, before pride cost his children the only chance they might ever have. The photograph of Rebecca seemed to stare at him from his wallet. Her smile sad and knowing, as if she'd predicted this exact moment from beyond the grave. Thursday night dinner service at the Riverside Bistro meant the dining room packed with Seattle's tech elite, venture capitalists closing deals, startup founders celebrating funding rounds, old money families maintaining traditions. Sophie worked the main floor, carefully avoiding the corner section where Nathan's table sat. Derek had made it clear. She didn't look in that direction, didn't think about that direction, didn't exist as far as the Westwood family was concerned. But at 7:15 p.m. on his usual Thursday evening, Nathan walked in with an entourage that made the entire restaurant stop breathing. The twins in their wheelchair, Claire, the assistant, the private nurse, and a woman Sophie recognized instantly from medical journals and conference proceedings, Dr. Victoria Chong, renowned pediatric neurologist from UCSF, specialist in developmental disabilities, author of 3 textbooks Sophie had studied in grad school. This wasn't dinner. This was a test. Nathan wanted a real expert opinion. wanted to prove the waitress wrong in front of someone whose credentials couldn't be questioned. The realization settled in Sophie's stomach like lead. Derek seated them at the corner table, the one with the best view and most privacy. But Nathan's voice carried intentionally across the dining room, loud enough for anyone paying attention to hear. "I appreciate you flying up on short notice, Dr. Chong. I need a real expert opinion, not waitress intuition based on wishful thinking." Sophie's hands tightened on the water pitcher she was holding. The message was clear. The audience was deliberate. This was Nathan demonstrating power, showing her exactly how irrelevant she was compared to people with actual credentials. Martha Williams caught Sophie's eye from table 5. Her elderly face creased with concern. She mouthed something that looked like "be careful." Sophie should have walked away, should have let Nathan have his expert consultation, should have stayed invisible the way 3 years of survival had taught her. Instead, she picked up a tray and walked directly past Nathan's table. As she passed, her hands moved through modified signs, the same gestures she'd used weeks ago. Index and middle fingers to temple, moving outward. Thumb and pinky extended, rocking gently. Basic pediatric therapy cues designed to encourage visual tracking and attention. Lucas's hand lifted from his lap, reached toward her. The movement was uncoordinated but deliberate, purposeful, impossible to dismiss as random. James's eyes found hers, held contact. 1 second, 3 seconds, 8 full seconds of sustained eye contact that statistics said children with a supposed diagnosis couldn't maintain. Dr. Chang's sharp intake of breath cut through the ambient noise. That's unusual responsiveness. Her voice carried professional interest, no mockery. "Nathan, look at Lucas's hand position. That's intentional reaching. It's random." Nathan's voice was defensive, almost desperate. "They move randomly all the time. It doesn't mean anything." Sophie stopped walking, turned to face the table directly. Every survival instinct screamed at her to shut up, walk away, keep the job she'd already been warned about. She spoke anyway. "It's not random, Mr. Westwood. They're responding to consistent nonverbal cues, the same visual and proprioceptive signals I've been using for weeks. Whoever diagnosed them as non-responsive missed their visual tracking ability entirely. They also missed their preserved intentional motor planning, which suggests sensory processing disorder rather than pure neurological damage." The restaurant went silent. Sophie felt 50 pairs of eyes land on her like physical weight. Dr. Chong tilted her head, studying Sophie with new interest. "That's specific terminology for a waitress. How do you know about sensory processing assessments?" "I read," Sophie said simply, "and I observe. Your sons should have received a comprehensive Bailey Scales assessment, Bailey 3 specifically, with the social-emotional and adaptive behavior scales." "Did they?" Nathan's face flushed. "I don't have to justify my son's medical care to restaurant staff." "That means no." Sophie's voice stayed calm, professional, the voice she'd used in 100 clinical consultations before her career ended. "The Bailey 3 is standard protocol for developmental delay assessment in children under 42 months. If your specialist skipped it, they missed critical diagnostic information, which explains why they declared your sons untreatable when clear evidence of neuroplasticity sits right in front of you." Martha Williams stood from her table, her small frame vibrating with righteous energy. "I've watched those boys for weeks from this seat. She's right. They're different when she's here, more present, more responsive. I've raised 4 children and fostered 6 more. I know the difference between random movement and recognition." Other diners murmured. Phones appeared, screens glowing as people started recording. This was Seattle society drama unfolding in real time. Billionaire tech CEO challenged by his waitress in front of medical royalty. Nathan stood, his chair scraping against hardwood. "What are your credentials?" His voice cut like a blade. Where did you go to medical school? Where's your license? Your degree? Give me one reason I should trust anything you say. Sophie's pulse hammered in her ears. Cold sweat broke across her back. This was the moment. Expose herself or back down. Tell the truth or lose everything. I'm qualified to observe what's in front of me, she said quietly. Are you? This is harassment. Nathan turned to the restaurant owner, who'd appeared from his office, drawn by the commotion. Michael, this woman has been bothering my family for weeks. I want her banned from working anywhere near my table. Actually, I want her fired. Now, Michael Chun, no relation to Sophie, looked between his VIP investor client and his waitress. The calculation on his face was visible. Nathan owned shares in 3 of Michael's restaurants. Sophie was replaceable. Sophie, you're reassigned to kitchen duty effective immediately, Michael said, his voice apologetic but firm. I'm sorry, but Mr. Westwood's comfort is paramount. Sophie untied her apron, hands shaking despite her efforts to control them. She was done. Fired. Again. Because she told the truth. Again. But as she turned to leave, she looked directly at Nathan, at his storm gray eyes that looked so much like the photographs of his sister Rebecca, at the defensive anger that masked terrified hope, at the man who'd rather be right than listen. Your sister Rebecca knew what you're refusing to see, Sophie said quietly. She tried to tell you that expertise doesn't always wear expensive clothes, that caring matters more than credentials. She died knowing you'd never listen to her. I hope you don't make your sons pay the same price for your arrogance. The restaurant was silent enough to hear water glasses trembling from the bass of the background music. Nathan's hand shook as it gripped his wine glass, knuckles white, the Chateau Margaux sloshing dangerously close to the rim. His breathing had gone shallow, visible even from 15 feet away. Dr. Chong watched the entire exchange with the clinical interest of someone witnessing a psychological case study. The twins, James and Lucas, were still turned towards Sophie, still tracking her movement, still reaching for someone who saw them as more than broken. Sophie walked toward the kitchen, her spine straight, her breathing controlled, her silver bracelet catching the light like a promise she'd kept. Behind her, she heard Dr. Chang's voice, careful and professional. Nathan, I'd like to run some additional tests on the boys, with your permission, because that woman just described symptoms I'm now seeing very clearly that weren't in the consultation reports I reviewed. And then Nathan's voice, barely a whisper. Lucas. Lucas, buddy, look at Daddy. Can you look at Daddy the way you looked at her? Sophie pushed through the kitchen doors, let them swing shut behind her, leaned against the stainless steel wall, and allowed herself 10 seconds of shaking. She'd burned every bridge, lost her job, exposed herself publicly, all for 2 boys whose father thought she was a scam artist. Emma's bracelet pressed against her wrist. Maybe this time, getting fired would be worth it. 3 days later, Derek made the termination official, harassing a VIP customer, creating a hostile environment, insubordination. Take your pick. He slid the paperwork across his desk without meeting her eyes. Final paycheck will be mailed. Don't use me as a reference. Sophie signed the forms in silence. What was there to say? She'd known the cost when she opened her mouth. Her bank account showed $89.47. Rent was 11 days overdue. The eviction notice had been replaced by a court summons. She had 14 days to pay or vacate. The legal kind of vacate, with sheriffs and forced removal. Her phone showed one text from Jenna, the only friend she'd kept from her old life. Saw the video. Everyone's seen the video. What were you thinking? Call me. Sophie didn't call, couldn't explain, couldn't face the disappointment. That night, she sat on her apartment floor with 2 items in front of her, the eviction summons, and the hidden folder of therapy protocols she'd kept for 3 years, telling herself she'd never use them again, Tomorrow morning, she had a job interview at a 24-hour diner near Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Night shift, $12 an hour plus tips that wouldn't exist at 3 a.m. It was barely enough to survive on, but it was something. She could take the job, keep her head down. Let James and Lucas Westwood become another regret she carried silently. Another pair of children she couldn't save because powerful men had decided her voice didn't matter. Or she could do something unforgivably reckless. Sophie touched Emma's bracelet, the engraved name worn smooth from 4 years of anxious fidgeting. 4-year-old Emma Chen, who'd come to Seattle Children's Hospital at age 3 with developmental delays everyone dismissed as permanent. Sophie had seen what others missed, treatable sensory integration disorder masked by initial misdiagnosis. She'd spent 6 months building Emma's treatment plan, making real progress, until Dr. Richard Holloway made his medication error and needed someone to blame. Holloway had been a hospital administrator then, powerful enough to destroy careers. He'd prescribed the wrong dosage to 3 pediatric patients under Sophie's supervision, a decimal point error that could have killed them. Sophie caught it, reported it through proper channels, believed the system would work. Instead, Holloway preemptively accused her, manufactured evidence suggesting she'd made the error, used his institutional relationships to ensure the medical board suspended her license during investigation. 6 months of bureaucratic hell while Sophie fought accusations she could eventually disprove. But Emma couldn't wait 6 months. Her condition worsened without treatment. Other therapists, seeing Sophie's pending malpractice investigation, refused the case. Emma's parents couldn't afford specialists. The little girl regressed, developed complications, died 3 weeks before Sophie's license was cleared. Emma's parents gave Sophie the bracelet at the funeral. "She loved you," Emma's mother had said, crying. "You were the only one who saw her." Sophie was eventually cleared of all charges. The evidence proved Holloway's guilt. But Holloway had connections, institutional protection, the ability to make problems disappear. He kept his position, moved to a Stanford consulting role, continued evaluating children, while Sophie's name remained problematic in the whisper networks that controlled medical hiring. She'd been waitressing ever since. Safe, hidden, silent. "Maybe Nathan's right," Sophie whispered to her empty apartment. "Maybe I'm seeing hope where there isn't any because I need redemption more than those boys need help." Her laptop sat on the kitchen counter. On impulse, she pulled up Nathan's medical consultation records, the ones mentioned in public articles about his search for treatment. And there it was, 9 months ago. Consultation report from Dr. Richard Holloway, Stanford Medical Center. Diagnosis: permanent neurological impairment, non-progressive, untreatable. The same words Holloway had used about Emma. The same dismissal. The same arrogance. Sophie's hand stopped shaking. Her breathing steadied. The doubt evaporated like morning fog under hard sunlight. Holloway had evaluated James and Lucas. Of course, he'd declared them untreatable, because treating them would require admitting he'd missed what someone with actual clinical skills could see, would require humility he'd never possessed. He'd done to Nathan's sons what he'd done to Emma, declared them hopeless to cover his own diagnostic incompetence. Tomorrow, Sophie would make a choice, not for redemption, not for herself, but because 2 4-year-old boys deserved better than a doctor who valued his reputation more than their futures. She pulled out her laptop and started writing. Sophie found Martha Williams's phone number through the restaurant's regular customer database, technically against policy. But Sophie didn't work there anymore. Martha answered on the second ring. "I wonder when you call." Her voice was warm, unsurprised. "What do you need?" Nathan Westwood's address. Sophie's voice was steady. "I know you know it. Seattle society is small when you've lived here as long as you have." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then, "You going to fight for those boys?" "Yes." "Good. Martha rattled off an address in Bellevue's Hunts Point neighborhood. He won't listen easily. Powerful men rarely do. I know. Sophie spent 6 hours writing a letter. Not an emotional plea. A clinical document. Professional. Detailed. Everything she'd observed about James and Lucas. Everything Holloway had missed or deliberately ignored. She attached copies of her old medical license, still technically valid, despite being professionally unusable. A photograph of Emma's bracelet with the engraved name visible, and a specific therapy protocol she designed for pediatric sensory processing disorders. Evidence-based interventions, cited research, step-by-step procedures. The final paragraph included her phone number and address. Nathan could call her, or he could call the police and have her arrested for practicing without proper certification. Sophie mailed the letter at midnight from the post office drop box. No return address. No way to take it back. 3 days passed. No phone call. No response. No acknowledgement that Nathan had even received it. Sophie interviewed for the airport diner job. Got it. Started night shifts, serving truckers and travelers who didn't make eye contact. She'd done what she could. The rest was up to Nathan. But every time her phone rang, her heart stopped, hoping it was a billionaire who'd finally decided to listen. 6 days after Sophie mailed the letter, Nathan Westwood's private security team delivered their report. They'd tracked her movements since the restaurant incident, documented her routine with clinical precision. Every afternoon for the past week, Sophie Chin spent 3 hours at the Seattle Public Library Center branch, always in the medical research section. The security footage was damning in ways Nathan hadn't expected. She wasn't researching how to scam wealthy families. She was reading pediatric therapy journals, neuroplasticity studies, recent advances in sensory processing disorder treatment. She'd requested interlibrary loans of specialized texts, titles Nathan recognized from his own desperate research month ago. She was also researching legal precedents for medical license reinstatement after false accusations, Washington State Medical Board procedures, whistleblower protections for healthcare workers who report malpractice. The letter sat on Nathan's desk, read and reread until he had it memorized. Her medical license, verified as authentic by his legal team. The photograph of a silver bracelet engraved with a child's name. The therapy protocol so detailed, so professional, it could only come from someone who'd spent years developing expertise. Dr. Sophie Chin, former pediatric neurodevelopmental therapist, destroyed by Dr. Richard Holloway, the same specialist Nathan had trusted with his son's futures. Nathan didn't know whether to believe her. Didn't know if this was an elaborate con or the most important letter he'd ever received. So he decided to test her. He called the number she'd included, offered her a job as private household staff, cooking, light cleaning, nothing that would require therapeutic credentials. He didn't mention the letter, didn't acknowledge her background, just offered employment at $25 an hour, which was generous for domestic work and desperate sounding for someone facing eviction. Sophie accepted within 30 seconds. The first week, she was perfectly professional. Arrived at 8 a.m., left at 4 p.m. Prepared meals according to the twins' dietary requirements. Cleaned surfaces that didn't need cleaning. Maintained careful distance from James and Lucas, never approaching them therapeutically, never even making extended eye contact. She was playing it safe, exactly what Nathan would do in her position. On Thursday of her second week, Nathan set his trap. He had a conference call at 2 p.m. Important investors couldn't be rescheduled. Claire was at a dentist appointment. The nurse had the day off. He told Sophie to keep an eye on the twins in the playroom while he took the call in his study. Then he left his study door cracked open and watched through the security camera feed on his phone. For 10 minutes, Sophie sat in the corner of the playroom, reading a book, maintaining professional distance. The twins were in their adaptive positioning chairs, a specialized toy placed between them. An expensive therapeutic device that cost $400 and was supposed to encourage bilateral coordination. Lucas made a frustrated sound, tried to reach for the toy, couldn't quite manage the movement the toy required. Sophie's head lifted from her book. Nathan watched her body language shift, the clinical observation returning, the professional assessment she couldn't quite suppress. She stood, crossed the room, knelt beside the twins. "Hey, Lucas. Hey, James." Her voice was soft, gentle. The voice of someone who'd spent years talking to children who couldn't respond. "That toy isn't designed right for you, is it? Let me fix it." She modified the toy in 30 seconds, adjusted the positioning, changed the angle, removed an unnecessary component that was creating a motor planning barrier. Then she placed it within Lucas's reach, supporting his elbow with gentle proprioceptive pressure that Nathan recognized from therapy manuals he'd read. "There you go. Try now." Lucas's hand moved, touched the toy. His eyes focused with intention Nathan had been told was neurologically impossible. Sophie's hands moved through gentle techniques, vestibular input, tactile cues, visual tracking exercises that looked deceptively simple but were clearly systematic, professional, therapeutic. "I see you, James," she whispered, making eye contact with his other son. "I see you, Lucas. You're in there. You've always been in there. Everyone else just stopped looking." 20 minutes. That's how long the session lasted. 20 minutes of systematic pediatric therapy performed by someone who'd claimed to be a cook. By minute 15, James was standing with hand support against the padded bench, his legs trembling, but bearing weight doctors said they'd never bear. Lucas was making intentional sounds, not words yet, but vocalizations that responded to Sophie's voice, that changed pitch based on her tone, that were undeniably communicative. Both twins tracked Sophie's movements with their eyes, focused, present, responsive. Nathan stood in his doorway, his conference call forgotten, his phone recording everything, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He was watching the impossible, the thing 17 specialists said would never happen. His sons, his broken, unreachable, permanently disabled sons, were responding, improving, connecting, because of a waitress, because of a woman he'd dismissed, insulted, had fired for daring to suggest he was wrong. Sophie whispered something Nathan couldn't hear from the doorway. James made a sound that wasn't quite a word, but was trying to be. Lucas's hand reached toward her face, touched her cheek with intention that made Sophie's eyes fill with tears. "Good job," she breathed. "Good job, both of you. You're working so hard." Nathan's hand froze on the doorframe, the exact position from the opening scene, the moment that would change everything, the discovery that would break his world open and force him to confront every assumption he'd built his life around. Sophie saw him. Her face went white. Her hands dropped from the twins. She stood quickly, professionally, guilty. "Mr. Westwood, I'm sorry. I know I wasn't supposed to. They were struggling and I couldn't." Nathan couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at his sons, still turned toward Sophie, still reaching for her, still more present than he'd seen them in 4 years. "My study," he finally managed. Now, Nathan's study was all dark wood and leather, walls lined with awards and framed patents, a monument to controlled success. He closed the door behind Sophie with careful precision, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in silence. "Explain." One word. His voice was steel. "Explain what I just watched." Sophie stood in the center of the room, her hands clasped in front of her to hide the shaking. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and hoping for simultaneously. "My name is Dr. Sophie Chen," she said, her voice steady despite her pulse hammering. "I'm a licensed pediatric neurodevelopmental therapist, or I was before Dr. Richard Holloway destroyed my career to cover his own malpractice." She pulled documents from her bag, the same one she'd sent in the letter. Her medical license, slightly worn but official. Credentials from her graduate program at the University of Washington. Employment records from Seattle Children's Hospital. Publications she'd co-authored before her career ended. I spent 7 years specializing in sensory processing disorders and motor planning delays in pediatric populations. Your son's present with classic symptoms. Symptoms I recognized the first time I saw them at the restaurant. They're not permanently disabled, Mr. Westwood. They're treatable. They've always been treatable. But the doctors you consulted either missed the diagnosis or deliberately misdiagnosed them. Nathan's face had gone pale. He picked up her medical license with trembling fingers, studied it like he was looking for evidence of forgery. Holloway consulted on my sons 9 months ago. He reviewed all their records personally. He told me they were beyond help, that no intervention would make a difference. I know, Sophie said quietly. He told Emma Chen's parents the same thing 3 years ago, and he was wrong then too. Sophie pulled out another document, one she'd kept hidden for 3 years, one she'd promised herself she'd never look at again. Emma Chen's medical file, copies she'd made before her license was suspended, evidence she'd gathered during her fight to clear her name. Dr. Holloway has a pattern, Sophie said, spreading papers across Nathan's desk. When he encounters complex neurological cases that would require him to admit diagnostic error or uncertainty, he declares them untreatable. It protects his reputation, makes him look decisive rather than incompetent, and costs children their futures. She pointed to Emma's file, 4 years old, presented with developmental delays, poor muscle tone, nonverbal. Every specialist said permanent neurological damage. But I saw the same thing I see in James and Lucas, preserved visual tracking, intentional movements masked by poor motor planning, response to sensory input that nobody was testing for. Sensory processing disorder, highly treatable with the right intervention. Her voice broke slightly. I was making progress, real progress, until Holloway made a medication error, blamed me for it, and got my license suspended during the investigation. Emma's treatment stopped. Her parents couldn't afford private therapy. Her condition worsened. She died 3 weeks before I was cleared of all charges. Sophie touched her silver bracelet, the one Nathan had seen her wear every day. Her parents gave me this at her funeral. They knew I tried to help, but trying wasn't enough. She looked at Nathan directly. Your sons have the same condition Emma had, the same treatable condition Holloway declared hopeless. You trusted the wrong expert, Mr. Westwood, and that expert deliberately destroyed the right one so his incompetence would never be exposed. Nathan's facade cracked like ice under pressure. He sank into his chair, his hands covering his face. My wealth couldn't help them. I paid millions, consulted the best doctors, and all I needed was someone who actually looked at them, Sophie finished. Someone who cared more about being right than appearing right. Sophie pulled out her phone with hands that had finally stopped shaking. I've been recording their responses for the past 3 weeks. Legally, as your household employee in a therapeutic capacity, I needed documentation in case this went to medical board review. She pulled up the videos. Dozens of short clips showing systematic progress. Week 1. James's eyes tracking Sophie's hand movements. Lucas's finger twitching in response to auditory cues. Week 2. Both twins turning their heads towards Sophie's voice, reaching motions that were uncoordinated but intentional. Week 3. The footage Nathan had just witnessed standing with support, sustained eye contact, pre-verbal vocalizations. This is measurable progress, Sophie said, her clinical voice returning. The kind of progress that happens when you correctly identify sensory processing disorder and provide appropriate intervention. Vestibular input, proprioceptive feedback, visual tracking exercises, basic pediatric occupational therapy that your sons should have been receiving for years. Nathan watched the videos 3 times without speaking. She saw it happening in real time. The billionaire's carefully constructed worldview crumbling, being replaced by something more painful and more hopeful simultaneously. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. My sister tried to tell me, Rebecca, she said I was being arrogant, that I needed to listen to people who actually cared instead of people who cared about my money. We fought about it. She died 2 weeks later, believing I'd never listen, that I'd never see past credentials and cost to find someone who could actually help my sons. He looked at Sophie with eyes that were red-rimmed but clear. I dismissed you because of your job, your class, your lack of institutional authority. I had you fired for trying to help. I threatened you. I called you a con artist. And the entire time, you were the only person in 4 years who actually saw my sons as human beings worth fighting for. Tears tracked down his face without sound. I'm the reason they haven't gotten help. Not Holloway. Me. Because I decided a waitress couldn't possibly know more than a Stanford consultant. Sophie felt her own eyes burn, but kept her voice level. An apology doesn't erase 6 months they've lost, Mr. Westwood. It doesn't undo the damage, but it's a start. She sat down across from him, meeting his eyes as an equal for the first time. Here are my terms. Full partnership in their treatment. My expertise respected equally with any other consultant you bring in. No more dismissing my clinical observations because they come from someone you used to employ as a cook. And most importantly, we investigate Holloway's pattern of misdiagnosis. Because if he did this to Emma and to your sons, he's done it to other children, other families who trusted him and got lies. Nathan nodded slowly. I agree to all of that, and I'm adding my own term. I fund your license reinstatement fight. Full legal team. Whatever it takes to clear your record completely and restore your credentials. And when you're reinstated, I fund your practice. A clinic specializing in the cases other specialists abandon, named after Rebecca, my sister who tried to teach me that caring matters more than credentials. Sophie's breath caught. She'd expected anger, dismissal, maybe grudging acceptance. Not this. Not genuine partnership. Not restoration. Why, she whispered. Why would you do that? Nathan looked toward the playroom where his son still sat, still turned toward the door Sophie had exited, still waiting for the person who saw them. Because you gave me my sons back, and because Rebecca was right, the most valuable people in the world are the ones society has trained me not to see. 3 months later, Washington State Medical Board, Hearing Room, Seattle. The chamber was formal, intimidating. Dark wood panels, high ceilings. A long table where 5 board members sat with folders thick enough to contain careers and futures. Gallery seating held maybe 50 people. Journalists, medical professionals, families whose stories were about to be told. Sophie sat at the petitioner's table, Nathan's legal team flanking her like armor. She wore professional clothes Nathan had insisted on buying, navy suit, sensible heels. Her silver bracelet, the only personal touch. Her hands were steady now. She'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. Across the room, Dr. Richard Holloway sat with his own attorneys, his face carefully neutral, his expensive suit projecting confidence. He'd built a career on projecting confidence. The board chair reviewed the evidence Nathan's legal team had uncovered. 9 cases over 7 years. 9 children diagnosed as untreatable by Dr. Holloway when their conditions were actually responsive to intensive therapy. 9 families told to give up hope when hope was medically justified. Emma Chen's file was Exhibit A. The little girl who died during Sophie's forced suspension, whose treatable condition Holloway had declared hopeless. James and Lucas Westwood were Exhibit B. Documented progress over 3 months of therapy. Progress Holloway said was neurologically impossible. Mr. Westwood, you've requested to present evidence in person. The board chair said, proceed. Nathan stood, his voice steady. My sons are here today. With Dr. Chen's permission, I'd like them to demonstrate abilities Dr. Holloway declared impossible 9 months ago. The side door opened. Claire entered, supporting the twins who actually walked with assistance, but their legs moved purposefully, bearing their own weight. The courtroom gallery murmured. Phones appeared, recording. Sophie guided James and Lucas to the center of the room. She knelt to their level, made gentle hand gestures, the same modified signs she'd used that first day at the restaurant. Both twins tracked her movements. Lucas reached toward her with intentional motor planning. James made sustained eye contact for 15 seconds, then attempted a sound. Not quite a word, but shaped, purposeful, trying to say Sophie. Martha Williams wiped tears from the gallery. Dr. Alan Pierce sat beside her, his face stunned despite having witnessed months of progress. Even Dr. Victoria Chong was there, the neurologist who'd observed the restaurant confrontation, her professional skepticism replaced by something like awe. I was wrong about their prognosis, Dr. Chong said when called to testify. I reviewed Dr. Holloway's consultation notes after that restaurant incident. He missed or ignored clear diagnostic indicators of treatable sensory processing disorder. The standard of care was not met. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. When they returned, the chair's face was grave. Dr. Holloway, your license to practice medicine in Washington State is hereby revoked. You will face criminal negligence investigation for Emma Chen's case and potential civil liability for damages to the families your misdiagnosis harmed. This pattern of diagnostic failure demonstrates unfitness to practice medicine. Then the chair turned to Sophie. Dr. Chen, your license is reinstated effective immediately, with a formal apology from this board for the harm you suffered during an investigation that should have concluded months earlier. Your courage in exposing institutional malpractice reflects the highest standards of medical ethics. Justice delivered, legal and restorative. A career destroyed and a career restored in the same afternoon. Holloway's face was ash gray as security escorted him from the chamber. Sophie felt nothing watching him go. No triumph, no revenge. Just the quiet satisfaction of truth finally told. Emma's bracelet pressed against her wrist. This time someone listened. 6 months later, the Rebecca Westwood Pediatric Therapy Center occupied a renovated building in Pioneer Square. All natural light and adaptive equipment in walls painted in colors that didn't overstimulate sensory-sensitive children. Sophie walked through the space she designed, greeting families in the waiting room, checking on therapy sessions in progress. She trained other dismissed therapists here, people whose expertise had been overlooked, whose careers had been destroyed by institutional politics, who understood that the best therapy comes from people who refuse to give up on children everyone else has abandoned. Her office still triggered anxiety sometimes. When hospital administrators visited for collaboration meetings, she still felt her chest tighten, still felt the phantom weight of accusations she'd disproven years ago. But now she didn't look away. Now she held their eyes and remembered she'd earned this space through refusing to stay silent. James and Lucas came twice a week, their progress documented in charts that told a story of impossible becoming possible. They walked short distances now with minimal assistance, used basic sign language to communicate needs and wants, attempted words that were getting clearer each session. Their first fully clear word came on a Tuesday afternoon. Sophie was working on articulation exercises when James looked directly at her, his 4-year-old face serious with concentration, and said Sophie. Not perfectly, but unmistakably, intentionally. Nathan, watching from the observation window, broke down completely. Later over coffee, he said what Sophie already knew. They knew who saved them before I did. Bittersweet pride, the recognition that expertise had been invisible to him until it proved itself against his dismissal. Growth came hard for proud men, but it came. Martha visited weekly, bringing cookies and wisdom. Dr. Pierce referred cases from his medical network. Dr. Chong published a paper on diagnostic humility, citing Sophie's case as evidence that medical expertise exists in unexpected places. Sophie touched Emma's bracelet, the engraved name still visible after 4 years of constant wear. She couldn't save Emma, but because of Emma, she'd saved others. That would have to be enough. Sophie Chen's journey took 11 months, from invisible waitress to restored expert, from dismissed observer to respected clinician. But here's what I didn't tell you at the beginning. There are hundreds more stories like hers. Hidden geniuses working invisible jobs. PhDs washing dishes. Former doctors driving rideshare. Concert pianists cleaning houses. People society trained us to overlook because we judge competence by appearance instead of ability. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss these stories as we share them. What hidden skill do you have that would shock people who only see your job title? Drop it below. Your story matters. You matter. The invisible people watching this matter.